There's a Riot end step video about ranged top laners. So I think we should watch that and see if we can figure something out about the ranged top laners. That seems to be bigger and bigger issue, I feel like, recently. There's been more and more ranged top laners appearing, and people are very conflicted about it. And I don't really think you can do anything, one broad move that will stop the ranged top laners from existing. I don't think that's possible, really.
All right, welcome to Discord Q&A number 18. Trying something new with this one. I've had a number of people asking me recently or talking with me recently, having discussions about ranged top laners, and I noticed that this has been a topic of discussion on some social media and in some communities.
But if you guys don't know, Riot Instep is a very vocal rioter. He keeps making very interesting videos and breakdowns of different concepts, so check
recently,
him out.
And August, there's actually a short that Quacks posted recently of August talking very briefly about range top. I'd actually recommend it if you were looking for short form content. I think it was actually really well put for something that was really short, but it was also really short, so it's not like there was a lot of
let's get into the meat
going on there. But I thought it might be nice to sort of give my perspective on how I view range top laners, not necessarily saying this is like how league designers think of range top laners, but like trying to give some context of like sort of how I view things as a designer that works on League of Legends, especially that has worked on the live environment and all that kind of thing. And so yeah, if you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, also let me know. But yeah, I'm definitely open to, hey, this has been a topic of discussion, in this, social media, this community, whatever.
Yeah, people are molding about this. I think Drutted and we had Drutted and Watley. They had like this weird debate on whether AD carries are becoming the majority in the top lane. And it was like a very, very goofy thing where they didn't really make any progress from what I watched, but it was a fun watch.
Topic, whatever. I'm totally open to doing more things like this in the future. Anyway, let's talk about ranged top laners. And one thing I want to establish first off, right off the bat, before we even get into talking directly about the state of things, is number one, that frustration and power are not the same thing, right? This is something where people will often...
That's Mel 101. That's exactly what Mel is. Mel is frustrating, but not super powerful. It's exactly was the crux of the dilemma.
Use language that distorts this, right? People will say things like, that champion is annoying, and they actually mean that they're powerful, right? Like, oh, they're annoying because they're doing something that stops you from winning, or because they're hard to beat or whatever. And what they're actually talking about is that they're powerful, right? Conversely, you have someone who will say, oh, that champion is OP, but what they actually mean is they're frustrating. And then if you ask them, they would like literally say, yeah, the champion is balanced, right? There's lots of examples of this, right? Like on both sides of frustration of frustration is not equivalent to power, right? Look at Mel, for example, right? It was not that long ago that she was 45% win rate with 30% ban rate, something like that.
The most hated champ,
powerful, but she was still clearly quite frustrating. Conversely, you have champions like Sona, who can sit at
very powerful,
fairly high win rates, right? We're talking 52, 53, even,
but easy to play against.
And people are not frustrated by this champion. And obviously there's a lot of reasons for that on Sona specifically. She has distributed outputs. It's hard to tell exactly what she's doing. She has a relatively weak lane, etc., etc.
Sona is the living embodiment of that support playstyle with the echoes of Healy and just getting like a bunch of healing done and like a bunch of boosting effects. She gives you move speed, she gives you healing, she gives you shield, tops you off. It's all this like subtle, unnoticeable things that just happen over time, but over time it increases your team's efficiency and ability to play extended fights. So that's why Sona is good. Pang, thank you for the raid. Hope you had a wonderful stream, man.
Very clearly, Sona can be quite powerful before people are frustrated at all by the the things that she's doing in the game. And so you can tell pretty easily with even just a small number of examples, frustration and power are not the same thing. And this is particularly important in regards to ranged top laners, because ranged top laners tend to be a lot more frustrating than they are powerful. This is not to say that a ranged top laner can't be powerful or can't be frustrating and powerful at the same time, but just understand that a champion like a Quinn, Teemo, Jace, Vayne Top.
Well, I don't know about Jace.
Right. These champions tend to feel more frustrating.
They're frustrating. I think Jace falls into the powerful category as well. It's one of the, I think it's the most picked character in top lane in Challenger and GM. and below that in every single elo is Garen. So, yeah, I think Quinn is a good example for that. Extremely frustrating to deal with. Some matchups are entirely unplayable into Quinn. Like, you have zero things you can do against her, but it's just, you weather the storm, you hunker down, and eventually you just emerge victorious. And she will lose more games on average. A lot of the times that's true for Teemo as well. But they're not powerful by any means of, like, by any stretch of imagination. Whereas, for example, Varus, he was giga powerful. With the Dusk and Dawn release, he was insanely powerful. The stats that he gets from that, he gets really tanky, he goes absolutely bonkers, he has such high base damage, and he's a ranged character, so he just can one-shot you, but you can't really engage on him and get him, because he can still, like, get point-and-click ult and one-shot you.
Actually powerful. And that is something that I will note is like important to discuss the topic at all, and something that I do want to just sort of address before I even get into talking about it. So let's talk about variance. This is another thing that comes in with ranged top laners, and in general, I think any rarely picked thing that might be frustrating, right?
That's true. I like the fact that he likened it to a rare champion, because rare champions can also have high degree of variance. Precisely that's why they're rare, because they're not very consistent, right? And same exact thing is, I think, true for a lot of ranged top laners. You can have a wide margins on the gameplay, right? You can fall completely flat and just never get to play because you lost early and enemies can just engage on you and you're completely destroyed. Whereas you can get a really good Vayne game and enemies can never reach you, and you're just going to continue getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So that's the variance there.
Is not just not just important for League of Legends to function, but it's actually critical, right? This is one of the things that the MOBA genre does incredibly well, is the MOBA genre is incredibly resilient and really well structured to create a lot of game-to-game variance. This is why there are lots of MOBAs out there that people will play for hundreds or potentially thousands of hours without getting bored of them, right? Unlike most game genres, right? You think of something like an open world RPG, and well, you'll eventually kind of, even if you're really, really, really invested in the game, you'll eventually run out of stuff to explore, right? You can think of like a platform. It's like,
yeah, this is obviously true. And people tell me, like, how do you not get bored of playing VelKoz a lot of the time? It's like, no, like, every game is unique. Every game is completely unique. Like, chess doesn't have repeat games, let alone League of Legends. And you're playing, like, I'm just playing one same character a lot of the time. But it doesn't matter, because all the other nines and the combinations and the rune setups and the play styles and the seasons and everything just shifts around it. So everything is just a new, unique challenge to tackle. It doesn't really get boring, provided you're invested in it.
Yeah, sure. There are platformers that are a little more replayable than others, right? You think of like Super Meat Boy, for example. But eventually, for most people, right, very few people are going to play hundreds of hours of a platformer.
True.
Right? You're going to run out of new content, like new things to explore. And one of the core parts of the MOBA genre that makes it incredible and incredibly replayable is that the games are very different. They present you with different scenarios very frequently, right? Every single game is a little different. Even if you were to play the exact same draft back multiple times with the same players, right? The results of that will not always be the same, right? You will actually experience new, novel interactions because of slight differences in the way that things played out, right?
And the beauty of that is also, like, the fact that the game number one can influence the game number two. Both because, well, you learned how the previous game went, so now it's a mind game of whether you're going to try to repeat the same strategy or try to change up. And the second mind game is the fact that you're playing the exact same players. So now you know the patterns of their players, of their movement, a little bit of what they like to do, So the first game, just the sequence there is beautiful, because even if you play the exact same games with same exact people, the games will radically shift over time.
Maybe a jungler paths differently and goes for a different gank, and that completely changes the way that the lane plays out. Maybe someone takes a different summoner spell, and that completely changes the way that an early trade goes. Maybe someone uses misses a critical skill shot, in the early lane, and that causes the rest of the lane to play out differently. Maybe someone barely fails an all-in that they succeeded on in the previous game, whatever, right? And that's not even getting into the part where champions change from game to game. You're not very likely to play against the same player playing the same champion in the same matchup from game to game, right? And even if you did, for an average solo queue player, even if you do run into that exact situation, the rest of the game will probably be completely different, right? Different players, different champions, etc. And it's really important that the game has a lot of variance, and that's part of
True.
making sure that those novel interactions actually occur from game to game is actually really critical to League of Legends being a fun game to play for hundreds of thousands of hours, right? League's a very old game, and it's really important that we actually support players who have played thousands of hours of the game, right? This is something where it's an important distinction. Most games don't care that much about players who have already played their game for hundreds of hours, right? You think of like box products games. It's like, well, if you've already played for hundreds of hours, you've kind of already bought the game, and that's kind of the end of the story.
I mean, it's you can't quite compare because those games aren't designed for such a thing. But it is true that League of Legends does a really good job of just taking care of the old community, which is exactly what's been happening for a lot of time. That's why we have so many players even still, and a lot of the players are very, very old. Like people just really stick in League because you get rewarded. There's many things that are waiting for you, and it doesn't really get too dry. There's been like some movement away from the old play styles and the game becoming faster and such. So maybe there's a tiny bit of alienation on the older player base. But they're doing a good job balancing of trying to appeal to new audiences while also keeping the old.
But with a game like League, just generally with live service games, it's usually pretty important to make sure that you're serving your audience that has already played your game a lot, right? And this is not just from like a business perspective, but just from like serving your actual audience perspective. It's important that someone who has already played 300 games of Tahm Kench Top or whatever, or more than that, still has novel interactions, still has a lot of variety in their experience. And insert any champion top top that you've played for 1,000 games or 2,000 games or whatever, right? And so one of the things that is really valuable here is that even if something is frustrating, like say ranged top laners, that can actually still be a positive for the game because it's adding additional variants, additional things that will be different about the game to make sure that you are still having novel experience.
I like that this first point is basically from the perspective of game health and longevity, even if it does detract potentially to some like from somebody's experience in few ways here and there, and it might add a certain degree of frustration here and there, but it does increase variance widely, and thus it would be a good thing from a video game designer perspective.
Right? For a lot of players, the motivation here is that novel experiences mean that there's something to learn and something to get better at, right? When you have a novel experience, of course, you can, you've never experienced it before, right? Maybe you've never actually been in this exact situation on, Tahm Kench versus Quinn top or whatever, right? And so learning about this situation makes you better in other similar situations, right? And you can use your experience from other similar situations to play it as well as you possibly can. But maybe you might learn something that is different about this. Oh, actually, this Quinn took exhaust, and that makes the situation play out differently. Or this Quinn dodged your first 2 Qs or whatever, right? We don't need to get into all the details, right? But essentially, we're creating a bunch of new novel experiences every time we give you a new matchup, right? Top lane especially is where matchups matter a lot more than the other roles. And so when we can offer you more variety, even if some of that variety comes with a little bit of frustration, we're generally willing to take that trade-off. Now,
it's going to be interesting to see like his opinion now, like whether some champions completely like whether they're too powerful and they kill the variance because every matchup's going to be you just sitting under turret and not getting to play. All right, so what is the opinion on those? Like, should that be changed or is that incentivized? I'm guessing he doesn't want it.
Right, I've talked up a lot of positive things about the variance that it is offered to top lane, and that's not even getting into the experience of the person playing the ranged top laner, right? Where it's like, well, it's offering you a completely different way of playing top lane. That's also a whole new dimension.
It's a positive,
haven't even touched upon. Of this is offering more experiences that you yourself can opt into because you could play the Teemo, the Kennen, the Jace, right, etc. Um, but even outside of that, uh, I think it is important to acknowledge that there is a level of frustration that is too high, right? There is a line that can be crossed here where,
Hmm.
yeah, the additional variance that we're getting is no longer worth it because you are so frustrated, or it's so common that it's just what being a top laner means is playing against, range tops, right? And this is something where I do think for sure at a baseline, we must support melee top laners. We must make
Hmm.
melee top laners feel like they're supported, right? We've made a lot of melee
They are a
champions.
majority, and they still generally will be the majority. And like from the patches, you can kind of notice that they don't let the range tops dominate for too long, right? If they're completely breaking the game, so I think they're following this exact train of thought with their design.
Intentionally for top lane. That's the gameplay people expect. Is the sort of there's sort of this implicit promise of the sort of like honorable dual lane, and I think it's actually okay if it feels like sometimes your opponent is cheating a little bit because they're ranged, right? You play against a Jace and it's, oh man, this guy, he sort of belongs here, but he's also sort of cheating because he's ranged. I think that's actually an okay experience, especially when there are sufficient outlets to that kind of frustration. You think of things like, well, what if most of our ranged top laners were really vulnerable to being ganked, right? Or the way that they play makes them vulnerable to being ganked and dying, right? It can be really a
I mean,
cathartic
that
experience
is true,
to
yeah.
have your jungler come up and punish them, right? And being
Yep,
really far ahead of
yep,
them,
and this happens. This happens a lot.
and then just running
Um,
them down.
Oh, what the fuck? You can do that? That's cool. That's cool. You never have to leave full screen. Yeah, this is true. This is exactly what happened today in the game. We had Kai'Sa top lane range, and he was trying to bully Aatrox early, and he was kind of bullying him. And by winning early slightly, he kind of developed this feeling that he deserves the win already for just making Aatrox suffer a little bit in early game. And then when he died once, he just completely imploded and started flaming everybody. That's the feedback we got earlier. Started running the game down on purpose after. Because his jungler wasn't obeying what he was saying in a way. And he's vulnerable to ganks, but you gotta modify your playstyle. Like, sure, you can extract a bit of extra value by playing super aggro. That's what we call a flip playstyle. It's basically just gambling that the enemies aren't going to punish your stupid playstyle, right? And some games going to work and you're going to maximize the value. Enemies are going to feel frustrating and you're going to win. But in some games, you're also going to punish. So you're lowering your chance to win in the long run by playing a bit more aggressive than you possibly can. It's just playing over the invisible line that we talked about. That's exactly what happened today. So yeah, it's a fun dynamic, like a melee guy finally getting this guy ganked and punishing him feels really good, especially like this. And then these guys just implode. They lose their shit. They lose the game on purpose after. And yeah, I mean, it can be an interesting dynamic for
Repeatedly
sure.
murdering them over and over and over again, right? I'm sure a lot of people have had that experience. Uh, and I think that's a great thing to exist. But there's definitely some area where we've exceeded the limits of frustration or exceeded the limits of commonality. In general, I do not believe that it is correct for a ranged top laner to be the best thing to blind, like to be like
Yeah,
generally picked in top lane, right? As
I
an
agree.
example, when Jace
These are very, very good parameters that he's going by. Like he's talking about the frustration budget and commonality budget, and these are good ways to like limit yourself, good variables to
is the
optimize.
premier top lane bully, and he is the champion that you blind pick. I think that is a bad state for top lane because I
Yeah,
believe that the baseline expectation of the player base is that top lane is sort of the honorable 1v1 duel, and when the default expectation is that it feels like your opponent is cheating that's
yeah, I agree, and it also makes sense from the video game, from the game perspective, from the game, the way the game is designed. Like generally, ranged characters tend to overstep beyond the minion wave to punish you and poke you down. So if that keeps happening, like they should be more prone to ganks. So that shouldn't be as blindable, you know. Alex, thanks for 4, man. Appreciate it. We'll pull out a VelKoz stop here and there. Get that like early level 13 spikes up insanely. Cheers, man. Appreciate it.
system, those sort of implicit rules that we've made for top lane over the years as people have opted into, yeah, this is the place where I want to play Darius and Garen and Yorick and Aatrox and Fiora, etc. It feels like we're violating the expectations that players have set over the years. And again, there are limits, right? Where I think that there's probably some amount of pick rate that, range top laners probably shouldn't be over. Not exactly sure what that number is, right?
Mhm.
But similarly, I don't think that range top laners should be the best thing that you can do, sort of from a blind perspective of like, yep, I like the right thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just like coming up with an arbitrary number, and I think like 20 to 35% is like where range top should exist, depending on the meta. I don't think they should probably exceed beyond that, because that would mean that they're probably too common and too good. It's hard to balance range as a thing in and of itself, because you're optimizing the balance for low ping and high ping, low velo and high elo at the same time, and pro, right? And for example, if you have high ping, your auto attacks aren't, your kiting isn't that consistent. So you gotta design for people to play on 100 ping, from 50 ping to 200 ping to 30 ping to Korea server, right? You gotta think about that. You gotta think about exactly how this is gonna work. In higher elo, people abuse long range auto attacks much more efficiently. They know how to drag the aggro and pull the minions and then drop the aggro. Maybe that's too high of a percent. I don't know. Just off the top of my head, I don't think it should exceed over 30 though. 30, 35. That seems like you're in the high range top business. It should be like a refreshing thing here and there to just add more dynamicism to the game.
To do in top lane is to just pick Kennen every game, or just pick Jace every game, or just pick Vayne top every game, right? There should be costs to that, and if they're situationally really powerful counter picks, that's okay with me, right? I think that's totally fine, and it's okay if some of them are respectable blinds, but not usually the absolute right thing to do. But there's a lot of reasons why we don't want to have them be super common or be super powerful, and so I think when I think of the current game, I look at it and I say, well, are they too powerful? Are they too popular in the current game? I don't have a great, detailed analysis of like, well, these three champions are exactly this win rate, and they're good at this win rate in these matchups, and that makes them slightly too good, or whatever. It's like I'm not going to give you an exact breakdown of that. I didn't spend the time looking at the current live data, but it would not be shocking to me if in the current game range top laners are maybe a little bit too good, because to me, one of the valuable things that we've done over the years is we've added really powerful systemic release valves to allow melee top laners to have some game against range top laners, to be able to resist them and feel like they have a win condition. Namely, the main two things I'm talking about here are Doran's Shield and Second Wind. And we did make Doran's Shield a little weaker last year, towards the end of last year. This is a problem that we've run into with Doran's Shield.
Yeah, the Doran's Shield Second Wind thing is, it does alleviate this problem with the range top, but it also creates this weird dynamic where it's just like, it doesn't feel satisfying for you as a melee to play into a range while he's constantly harassing you, but also it doesn't feel satisfying for a range player to constantly be poking and working hard but not getting any value for the poke, right? This is a common theme in mid lane, where you're gonna play versus any melee character. You can have it doesn't even have to be melee. You can play versus Yuumi mid lane at one point in the meta, and they would just go like Doran Shield, you get the second win, and you just don't care, and you can tank anything and just farm up as Yuumi mid, So that was a little bit of a problem for mid lane
over the years, is that we made them with the intention of enabling melee top laners to resist range top laners and give them a fighting chance of actually surviving out and getting some farm in the early game to help relieve a lot of that frustration of playing against a range top laner. And I think they function for that. But we also found them to be fairly disruptive to range versus melee mid, where then it feels like the mages actually can't interact correctly, or like
it can't, because usually the melee guy in mid lane tends to be weaker early, and he's gonna, if he gets to equal farm, he's going to surpass the range character in mid lane. The problem is that this weakness early doesn't exist. It's essentially mitigated because mage is poking for no reason. Like, it's not even worth to poke a lot of times because you just run out of mana. You literally run out of mana.
Level of efficacy with a lot of melee mid laners, and so we reduced the power of Doran's shield specifically because of some of the undesirable things that were happening mid. But that has consequences for top lane. This is something where I suspect we need another solve besides just here are some systemic factors that you can opt into as any melee champion, because it's much more disruptive in
Yeah, I feel like it would be cool to have more like proactive solutions instead of passive ones like that, which just rely on like enhancing a little bit of frustration for both players. There's also now potential solution in a systemic way with the role quests. I'm not I enjoy the role quests. I think they're fun. They're a good addition to the game, and they increase like this variance per game because they have like, it's an interesting mini game to deal with. But on the other hand, I don't like the fact that they're hard coding people into specific roles. I'm not a big fan of that with the role quest. But that offers also a unique solution that you can use role quest, for example, to solve the top range problem. In a way, you can do like modifiers. You can definitely work for something like that eventually.
Desirable ways for
if you need to. But I do think that it's better to just. I think for now it's fine, and they should just keep it on like a case-to-case basis. If there's big, egregious characters that are ranged top, they should just look to nerf them, or like the core items that make them broken in the first place. Again, like Dusk and Dawn. So I think that should be probably the best policy right now. Right now, we're not in dire straits yet in regards to the ranged top lane meta, so we don't need to deal with that. You don't need to solve it like in a systemic way.
Whereas the power level that it seems like we actually need for melee top laners to be able to resist ranged top laners, the correct amount, is too high for mid lane. But the correct amount for mid lane melees is a little bit too low for top, right? And so this is something where, as an example, not saying we should do this, right? But it's like, as an example, what if we just literally said that top lane quest gives you some health regen, right? Or what if we did different starting items based on what role you're in, and the top lane one that resists, that is melee anti-ranged is better than the mid lane or whatever, right? There's lots of different solutions. And again, I don't necessarily know what the live pod's current thoughts on this.
Dude, Azzapp is just, he's so well thought out with his ideas, because he's just systemically isolating exact ways on how you could deal with it. He seems like extremely efficient at what he does.
But my suspicion, one of the things that I expected to happen when we nerfed Doran's shield last year was, yeah, this probably is a pretty meaningful improvement for the quality of mid lane gameplay, but it probably does mean that top lane ranged champions are probably a little bit too good, probably a little bit too frustrating, probably may become a little bit too common. And so in general, to sort of sum this up, ranged top laners are doing a valuable thing in adding variance to your experience. They're adding new things for you to learn. They're adding a new dimension for people to play. And also they add, whole new dimensions to compositions and stuff. There's a lot of value that they are bringing to the table. However, they aren't really, they probably shouldn't be the most powerful thing to be doing by default.
Yep.
There probably do need to be avenues for the melee champions can opt into to resist being harassed out and being completely shut down by the ranged top laners. Those things may not be quite powerful enough in the current game. Don't have a super great analysis of that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that were true. And those tools, do have some problems in mid lane, and so there is some sort of overlap there that I think might be worth us taking a look at and investigating at some point. So hopefully this was useful. Again, if you liked this sort of
that was
overview of the topic from a design perspective,
that was a very good reasoning on it, honestly, from both the designer's perspective to the game, and I think it sort of aligns with what I imagine it should be in a good world, if they're taking care of the game. And this is very, very good. They didn't fall for because if you look into like League Twitter, you're gonna get like a whole different experience where people are wishing like ancient curses from Egypt upon people who play ranged top, right? It's all this like meme that persists throughout the League community, and it keeps on going. And it can be fun here and there, and you would think like there's a ranged top in every single game, but it's not even close. And they're keeping a good eye on the top lane here, and I feel like they have very solidly created boundaries around it when it's a breaking point, when you can't really deal with it anymore, so they nerf it. I think it's pretty cool. Pretty good stuff by Azzapp there.